Luigi Oliverio, and I'm a board member, along with my other fellow board members, Kathleen Almasino, Mitch Ehrlich, Helen Hutchins, Leanne Lindenlaum, Jose Salcido, Anna Maria Russo, Maren Sederquist, and Mary Fox. The Willow Neighborhood Association was founded 50 years ago, and actually Chris Shum, your mother, was one of the founders, so bless your heart, and your father. And so today we focus on beautification such as murals, park cleanup, dumpster day, which we just had, which was amazingly wet, oddly in May, and National Night Out, which is the first Tuesday in August, and advocating for local land use control rather than the state government. The association feels strongly that we should have a voice with our locally elected city council rather than trying to persuade a Sacramento bureaucrat on particular land use issues. If you live within the boundaries of the association and you are not a member, we encourage you to consider joining. We have a table out in the front. Originally, our neighborhood association meeting had scheduled this budget presentation as content for our general membership meeting. However, the meeting morphed into the District 6 budget meeting. So a friendly welcome to those visiting from other neighborhoods within the district. I see Lori Bird from Shasta Hampton. Lori, I hope you're doing great. If you would like to consider volunteering for any of our upcoming events, please grab a board member and say hi or send an email, whatever you prefer. We would like to provide a very special thanks to St. Francis Episcopal Church for providing their beautiful church this evening. For tonight's budget presentation, please submit your questions in writing. Kathleen Almasino will be picking them up. She's waving her hand right now. And then we'll be asking those questions after the presentation. We'll probably group them together if they're same question on multiple questions on the same topic. We will ask that you hold questions till after the presentation is complete. And at this time, I'd like to hand the meeting over to our elected officials for the next 4 hours.
Just teasing.
Good evening and welcome. This is actually my church, so I'm welcoming you to this church. I'm Councilmember Deb Davis. I'm also your council member for a couple hundred more days. And I am glad that you are here to participate and learn about our city's budget. This is actually a bit of a tough budget year for us. And in addition to having a small deficit, we have a large issue that we have to deal with, and I'm sure you are all familiar with our homelessness problem, but we need to deal with the Clean Water Act this year in conjunction with our homelessness problem, and I know the mayor's going to talk a lot about that. So thank you again for coming. I do encourage you, this is our time to ask questions and really delve deeper into what part of your tax dollars do, since we don't get all of your tax dollars. It's shared between the county and the state and the city. So without further ado, here is Mayor Matt Mahan.
Thanks so much, Councilmember Davis, and good evening, everyone. It's great to be here. I want to also thank St. Francis Episcopal Church for allowing us to use the space, and thank you to the Willow Glen Neighborhood Association for promoting civic engagement and giving us this opportunity. So as Councilmember Davis said, we've got some real challenges, both out in the community that we're trying to address and some fiscal challenges this year that we're trying to reconcile. I'm going to give you kind of an overview of a little bit of budget, kind of context and history, what's going on this year, some of the investments in this budget. It will be high level, and I'm sure the jumping off point for many good questions. I'm going to direct as many of the tough questions to Councilmember Davis as possible, but just kidding. But actually this year, for the first time since I've been on the council, Councilmember Davis and I were in the same Budget Brown Act meeting. We've been able to work together and collaborate. I've enjoyed working with Councilmember Davis on this, and certainly learned from her in our conversations. And even with the tough budget, I'm proud of what the city manager has brought back in response to our message in March. So we'll get into all that. Why don't we jump in here? And I understand Aiden is moving the slides. Great, okay. So just a sense of where we are. I'm just going to, again, run through this very quickly, hit a bunch of things, and I'm sure your questions will help us go deeper into it. The process every year kicks off with the council talking about priorities. The mayor puts out a March message in collaboration with some colleagues. That comes to the council. We discuss and debate, tell the city manager what our priorities are. She has the very difficult job of coming back with a literally 1,000-page document that says, here's where all the dollars are going to go and exactly what we're going to do next year. She has now done that. We have her proposed operating budget. We're doing study sessions in community town halls to digest what's in there and hear your feedback. And then we have one final council vote, one final message from the mayor based on all this input, one final council vote in mid-June, and then our new fiscal year starts July 1. So that's where we are in the process. Let's keep going. Next slide. Just to give you a snapshot of the operating budget, this is really the staffing, where the head count is. That's our biggest cost driver. You'll see, obviously, police and fire up there. When you think about a city, our big priorities are public safety, basic infrastructure, roads, sewers, streetlights, neighborhood services, parks, libraries, community centers, and then of course we do a lot with land use and permitting, code enforcement, inspections. You don't see schools up there. Anybody know why? We don't do schools. That would be the your elected school boards, and then the county board of education on up to the state. You don't see hospitals. That's your county. You don't see the jail. County, prison would be the state. So health and human services largely falls under the county. They generally have the jurisdiction and funding for most things there. We try to support through our libraries and some of the programs we run, after school programs and such. And then of course education is elsewhere. So that's kind of our core focus area. Let's go to the next slide. One of the pieces of just historical context that I just like to set for folks, and I don't in any way want this to sound like an excuse, but it is important for you to know our fiscal reality as a city, which is that we're a big city with a relatively small budget. On a per capita basis, we have significantly lower revenue than most of the cities near us. So if you look up here, our two biggest sources of revenue for our general fund are property taxes and sales taxes. That's how we compare to neighboring cities on property taxes. Next slide. That's how we compare on sales taxes. And of course, I'm going to ask you, why is that? And the dead giveaway is sales taxes and Cupertino being way out there. Why do you think they're way out there on one end of the spectrum? Yeah, one company, right? So historically, we were built as a suburban bedroom community, a very residential heavy city for the job centers on the peninsula. And before Prop 13, that didn't matter so much. But since then, we have been at a real disadvantage, and in fact, our cost of providing services has exceeded the revenue that we get from our residential land. So what that says is we have to be a city that is very focused, we have to be very clear about our priorities, we have to be very fiscally responsible and get as much impact as we can, use technology and be really effective. And we have to be business friendly and bring jobs and build the tax base here. One other reason for that is, if we go to the next slide, that we also made some not great fiscal decisions historically and did not properly fund or kind of have the right projections around what it would take to meet our obligations to our city employees who retire. And so $350 million a year just comes right out of the general fund just to backfill those unfunded obligations. Now, thankfully, we are, thanks to your support and working with our bargaining units, we're on a very long, slow glide path to eventually paying most of that off by the early 2040s. Over time, we'll start to have more budget become available as we pay that off. But that's kind of a generational mistake in some ways, or lack of planning, and now we've got to pay that off. So that's another drag and another reason to be highly focused. So what should we focus on? Let's go to the next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, that's just a sense of historical staffing. Just make the note that we took a huge hit in the Great Recession. We're not in a great position fiscally already for the reasons I mentioned. We are still not quite back to the staffing levels we had at the end of the dot-com boom. So we're at about 7,000 city employees, which if you were to look at another big city from a ratio standpoint, you'd expect us to have over 10,000 employees, just to give you a sense of our lower staffing. And you feel that, public safety and really all of our departments. Okay, in terms of priorities, you all, I think, have been extremely clear with us about your priorities. Through every way I know how to measure, knocking on the doors, coming to meetings like this, polling, and this is really our primary source of truth for this kind of data, which is our annual resident survey, where we survey thousands of residents, and it too is very consistent. What we're hearing over and over again is there's frustration, we know that. The biggest driver is unsheltered homelessness. It's folks living out in tents and cars and everything that comes with that, the immense human suffering and all the other impacts of it. It's the high cost of living, particularly driven by the high cost of housing, which is particularly driven by the lack of housing supply relative to all the job growth that we've seen in the region, right? We've created 6 jobs in Silicon Valley for every 1 new home we've built over the last 15 or so years. Which is driving up costs, it's supply and demand. We hear a lot about crime and public safety, and then blight and beautification, and cleaning up the city. So these are very consistently the priorities we hear. So, if we go to the next slide, it'll be hopefully no surprise that the budget message that I put forward with input from Councilmember Davis and a few other colleagues really reflects back what we keep hearing from you, which is we're going to concentrate our dollars on reducing and ultimately ending unsheltered homelessness, supporting the construction of housing, investing in public safety, particularly police staffing and technology, cleaning up the city, and then we've called out here attracting investment, because if we don't build that job base and get more economic activity here, we're going to always be facing these very difficult trade-offs. Let's go to the next slide. So I want to give you a little more context before we jump into those sections of the budget where we've called out putting a special emphasis that I just listed. The unique situation we face this year and likely over the next few years. Last year we had an easier task. We had a $35 million surplus. So, and I appreciate the council's support for this, we took $19 million of that and we didn't spend it. We set it aside, which is good. A lot of times politicians don't want to do that, but our council had good foresight last year, and we took the majority of it and set it aside. Thank goodness, it makes this year less painful. But we still have a shortfall, as the council member mentioned. We have a very short deficit. The deficit's basically a rounding error on a budget of this size. We also have a number of things we had funded one time for quite a few years when we had modest surpluses, many of which we want to keep in the budget, and we have to trade off against something else because there's no surplus this year. And then the really big hit, but it's important, and I think ultimately it's going to be a good thing for us, is this stormwater permit issue and what we need to do to better comply with the Clean Water Act. So I want to get into that. If we go to the next slide. Thank you. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of context here. So the EPA, and we have federal law, Clean Water Act, administered by the EPA. They delegate to the State Water Board and regional water quality control boards the enforcement of the Clean Water Act. And we have to have a stormwater permit to kind of be in good standing there. Well, part of that is this discharge plan that shows how we are managing discharge into the waterways from various sources. We have been effectively really on thin ice for many years. We've had this discharge plan we came up with where we said, well, we know we're kind of technically violating the Clean Water Act. There's a lot of pollution in the waterways. We've lost lawsuits on it before. In fact, we're currently under a settlement for $100 million with Baykeepers, a nonprofit that protects the bay and the waterways. But look, we're going to spend all this money on trash capture devices in the stormwater system, cleanups, funding nonprofits that do this work, and they give us credits essentially. Well, over the last year, as we have applied for renewal of our stormwater permit, they have rejected our direct discharge plan 3 times in a row and said, not good enough. We know you're trying, we appreciate the investments, but it's just not good enough. There's as much trash as ever flowed in the water. Our Department of Environmental Services did an analysis that showed that about 88% of the trash going in the waterways is due to the fact that we have thousands of people living along the waterways. Makes sense? So metals, plastics, bio-waste, all pathogens. So we're in a back and forth with the Regional Water Quality Control Board to come to an agreement over how we're going to renew our stormwater permit for the next 5 years and what investments we will need to make to get people out of the waterways and prevent more of that pollution and biowaste from going into the waterways so that we are not in violation of the Clean Water Act, under which, by the way, if you go to the EPA and you can pull this up, we could be subject to litigation that can literally entail penalties if we were found to be in violation here of up to $66,000 per pollutant per day. That's the upper bound, but we don't want to mess around with that. Per day with hundreds of potential pollutants out there. So this is pretty serious business. We're working through what this looks like. One of the things that's important to us, in addition to being in compliance with the Clean Water Act and renewing our stormwater permit, is that we don't just take a shortcut here and say, okay, you can't be near the waterways anymore, you can't camp there, and we just send them into your neighborhoods. We know the community doesn't want us to send 2,000 people with tents right into your front and backyards. So this is going to be a real challenge. It's going to be very painful over the next few years. It's going to require trade-offs. It's going to cost real money. There's no easy solution because we need places for people to go, which I'm going to say another word on in a moment. In the long run, though, we will be better off because it's kind of like the forcing function of the harsh winters in New York, Boston, Chicago that have forced those cities and states to be shelter first and to create places for people to go and then to require people to come indoors. There's a forcing function that we have not had in California. So we're going to have to create places and get people indoors and out of the waterways and not in your neighborhoods. So it's going to be a major project over the coming years. It will not be solved in 1 year. So I just want to be very clear about that. Okay, so let's keep going. I want to talk a little more on homelessness, and then I'm sure we'll go much deeper in the Q&A. First is, I do have some good news on this front, which is that the combined investment in recent years of building long-term permanent affordable, so subsidized affordable housing for our lowest income residents, combined with investments in more immediate interim housing, where we've stood up 500 units of modular individual rooms on government-owned land, has led to a very significant reduction year over year. Last year, it's a once-a-year count, so it does fluctuate, but we measured an over 10% reduction in the number of people living outside. Well, the rest of the statewide average was a 10% increase. So the numbers probably aren't super precise, but directionally that's interesting, that we're starting to see a decline while the rest of the state's going up. And I think it's that dual investment in both long and short-term solutions. The challenge, though, just to be very clear, is there are real limits to scaling either of these in the short run, given the resources we have. The permanent affordable takes 5-6 years to title, permit, finance, construct, and open. And all in, the subsidies, some of it's a loan, to be clear, but it can cost $1 million a door. And the interim, if you're going to do utility hookups and services, it's going to take 18 months to build and still cost $80,000, $90,000, $100,000 a door, best case. So these are still not particularly scalable when you've got what's estimated to be over 4,000 people citywide living outside. So we're going to need faster, cheaper alternatives. So in this budget, we do a few things. One is we do, next slide, sorry. We do finish the pipeline of these modular units because they're faster, they're cheaper, they give somebody dignity, it's an individual room with a door that locks, and it gets them connected to case management and supportive services faster, and we're seeing throughput. Average length of stay is only 6 to 9 months. 70% of the people who have ever entered one of our quick build sites remains indoors and off the streets today. 50% have graduated to a more permanent placement. So we're going to finish that pipeline. Well, we don't have the money to go any further right now, and probably not for quite a few years, because they're not that cheap to build at $100,000 a door. It fluctuates depending on where you're building, how many units, etc. And the operations are expensive. They're service intensive. You get somebody out of an encampment, into their own room, connected to a case manager with job training, drug treatment, all the rest. It's costing almost $30,000 per person per year to operate these sites. That is not cheap. So we're going to finish this pipeline, which will give us an immediate benefit, but it will not solve the waterway issue. Let's keep going. What that means, and this is what my March message really tried to outline in some detail, and city manager's coming back with, is we are going to have to embrace lower rungs on the ladder, faster, cheaper alternatives to the streets, to the creeks, and get people stabilized and connected to services and give them a shot at turning their lives around and getting to something more permanent and to get to greater levels of self-sufficiency. A lot of challenges with this, no perfect answers, but we're going to have to experiment with safe sleeping, safe parking. We're already doing. We're going to need more places. We have 800 RVs out on the streets in front of homes, parks, businesses. We got to get them into managed parking lots with services and off your streets. It's not free, but it's going to be better to do it that way. So safe sleeping, safe parking, more interim units, conversions of motel rooms, congregate shelter. Not great, but more cost effective than what we've been doing. And then, of course, prevention. And I think there's a real opportunity for the city and county to come together, bring in private and philanthropic dollars, and the best dollars we can spend on this prevent someone from becoming homeless in the first place. Homelessness is so often precipitated by a life event, a job loss, a divorce, a health issue, that if we can identify the folks who are about to fall into homelessness who are already in our community and bridge them. We've just seen a proper research piece published on our prevention efforts in our county that shows that it is significantly more cost effective to intervene and stabilize somebody for 6 to 9 months and keep them housed and get them to something more self-sufficient and more sustainable, than to let them fall into homelessness, in which case things just further and further unravel. And the longer we leave people out there, the harder it is to ever help them get back to self-sufficiency. It becomes very, very difficult. So those are the kinds of things we're going to need to embrace. Let's keep going. I'm going to pick up the pace here because I want to get to your questions and conversations. Last couple of points on homelessness as we do this, because, look, let's be honest, we're asking you all to keep investing real money, tens of millions of dollars in solutions to homelessness. You need to also believe that we can solve this problem and see that we're making progress. So one thing that I've pushed and is in this budget message, and I think the council is somewhat supportive of, is this idea that when we spend millions of dollars to build alternatives, offer them to people, and we get people out of encampment and we clear and clean up an encampment, we should strategically start to preserve our progress by expanding the areas where we enforce no re-encampment zones and start to say these are areas, especially if they're in or near parks, trails, along waterways, where we're just going to not allow re-encampment. We're going to immediately abate. We're just not going to allow them to reestablish and grow. We've got to reduce the defensible area across the city where we're trying to manage encampments and get people into shelter and housing. So preserving our progress is an example. This guy, for what it's worth, I call him tennis court guy, he came back about 5 times, and the last straw, we were finally able to get city attorney and the police chief to agree to enforce a no encampment zone here because he was throwing rocks at the cars driving by. And it was like, okay, forget it. We've offered him housing. We've kicked him out 5 times. Let's stop having to come back and police this spot again. Let's just take this one off the table. It's highly visible. It's right next to a park. So we did. So I think we're going to have to do more of that over time as we offer people alternatives. Next slide. The notion of a good neighbor policy. Both sets of RVs are lived in. One's being a better neighbor than the others. Now, we need to help people to be good neighbors. We need to do trash pickup. We need to help them as long as they're out there in encampments. But there needs to be some basic code of conduct or set of expectations we hold everybody accountable to. There have to be some basic rules for living in a city of 1 million people where we can take care of each other and have a livable environment. So starting to define what are the rules in terms of the size of an encampment, the amount of belongings, the trash accumulation, the fire risk, the visible attributes, that we can start to hold people accountable to some standards. That's not going to be easy, but I want us to start having that conversation and have city departments lean in and have some responsibility for more hands-on management of what's happening on our streets. Okay, let's keep going. I'm going to just touch on the others. Building housing, let's dive into. Aiden, next slide. Thank you. Just want to be clear, the city's going to continue to invest in affordable housing. We've invested, with your Measure E dollars, about $250 million into affordable housing in the last 5 years. The county's done about $1 billion. We put $50 million more in last year. This year, we're continuing to put money in, though we have a lot less. This year, that investment's going to be $20 to $40 million, depending on certain revenue sources from other levels of government. I'm really interested in us also, though, continuing to push on reducing city fees, speeding up processes, creating more certainty, and trying to change market dynamics so that it becomes easier for private capital to flow in to build the housing we need where it makes the most sense, in places like downtown and near transit and in our urban villages and places where we have the infrastructure to sustain greater density. We cannot subsidize our way out of the affordable housing crisis. We need the private market to invest in building a heck of a lot more housing where we have the infrastructure for it. Let's keep going. Okay, I talked about that already. Here we go. On to the next one. Safer City. Last year, I told you all the bad news. 5 years of declining enrollment in our academies. We saw an 80% drop, 10,000 applicants a year to 2,000. Back to tell you, and thank you again to council colleagues for making this investment. Last year, we doubled the dollars going into recruitment and outreach and marketing. And we're seeing, I don't think it's all due to that, but we're seeing the first increases in our academy sizes as we project out that we've seen in years. And that matters a lot. We have 100 budgeted roles in the police department that are not filled today because we have not been able to recruit faster than we've had retirements. And just to put it in perspective, we hear a lot about response times and capacity for investigations and proactive policing and police presence and all the rest. It's largely just a function of staffing levels. We have fewer than 10 street-ready officers for every 10,000 residents. Every other big city in the country has over 25. So we're way off in the staffing levels that we need. So we're going to continue to push there. To supplement and create more leverage, we're investing in technology. Last year, we got about halfway through the build-out of what will ultimately be a 500 license plate reader network citywide. These license plate readers have already helped us solve kidnappings, home invasions, smash and grab robberies. This year alone, we are on track to recovering $3 million of your stolen vehicles because of this license plate reader network. So we're going to continue to invest in technology. And for those of you who are worried about the privacy, we created rules years ago with advocates and came up with very clear transparency and data privacy rules. There's no facial recognition. It's a still photograph of a license plate with basically a time and place. We delete the data very quickly if it's not used in an investigation, and we delete all the data within 12 months. And we don't share it with third parties. Okay. Safer City. So in this budget, we continue the higher level of investment in recruiting and outreach for our police department and fire department. We introduced a women's academy for the police department. We have one for the fire department to try to help diversify our ranks. We put additional dollars in to be able to do our first speed safety pilot program. So be careful, and probably next year, if you're speeding near a school, you may get a warning in the mail, and 6 months after that, you may just get a ticket. So we're going to start to try to change behavior around speeding using technology, and then we're doing a little investment in cadets to try to get young people to really consider law enforcement careers. Let's keep going. Almost there. Clean up the city. Thank you to so many of you in this room who have come out to our cleanups. Last year we did over 55 cleanups, had over 3,000 people come out to a community cleanup. We do those in partnership with council members on the weekends and neighbor associations and faith communities. Last year we had a 300% increase in the number of people who came out to volunteer at a cleanup in a park or along in an intersection or wherever it might be. Took 10 million pounds of trash off the streets, and our city staff did a lot of that. Our Beautify SJ teams, our contractor and city teams took about 3 million square feet of graffiti off the streets, and our city team responded to over 300,000 calls for service. So as we look ahead, next slide, we're going to continue investments in 311. If you haven't used it recently, it's worth checking out. Again, number of city services you can report and get fast response to, a pothole, a street light that's out, graffiti, illegal dumping, an encampment that needs to be checked on. There are a number of services there. We're putting dollars into optimizing our response to abandoned vehicles, which has our lowest customer service rating in 311. We are also going to do some more enforcement. We're finding that cleaning up the city, which is a basic responsibility, just dealing with trash and graffiti is costing more each year. It's growing in cost faster than our revenue. And so we're going to also need to do some upfront enforcement, kind of going after some of our really prolific and destructive, taggers who are tagging the freeway signs repeatedly, for example, and the illegal dumpers, the folks who are pulling over on the side of the road and dumping everything out of the back of their pickup truck on the side of the road. I don't think enforcement's the whole story, but we're going to need to do some to send a message that we won't tolerate this in San Jose. Otherwise, we're going to spend, another 10, 20% every year just cleaning up after bad actors. So we're going to do a couple of sting operations and try to just send a clear message. All right. And then on attracting investment, a lot of it is just back to basics as well. We hear the same things from our small business owners. It's that, we're worried about safety and homelessness and cleanliness and the same issues. So we've expanded participation in the downtown foot patrols. We're going to add community service officers. We're even bringing part of our field training program to downtown just to create more presence. And we're going to strategically try to have more of those foot and bike patrols in commercial districts so people want to spend their time and money here, so we have the tax base to fund all the other services our neighborhoods need. So that's been a big part of it. We also have strategically, when I came into this role a year and a half ago, we had about 80 empty storefronts in the downtown, so we've made some strategic investments in helping small new businesses pop up and have 6 to 12 months to see if their concept can start to work, and hopefully we can incubate some new small businesses in those empty storefronts, which also just adds to the vibrancy and safety of the neighborhood. And we hired a dedicated downtown manager. Let's talk about going forward. We are looking at a few things here. One is partnering with San Jose State and the tech to try to create a little more of a startup ecosystem. We have over 30 venture-backed AI startups in and around our downtown with a combined market cap of about $1 billion. We want to keep those companies here, and we want more of our San Jose State grads and community college grads to stay in San Jose, start companies here, join companies here, and build that economic tax base for our city. So we're looking at what is our appropriate role as a city in supporting that kind of ecosystem. We're planning for 2026. We've got Super Bowl, 6 World Cup matches, 2 March Madness games here in the South Bay in 2026. Councilor Davis has been, in my ear telling me we have got to plan ahead. We want to make sure when these events come that unlike the last time the Super Bowl came, we don't have all the economic impact in San Francisco just because they have a nice bridge, but that we actually have more of the programming down here, more of the hotel bookings, and that we feel more of the positive economic impact in San Jose. So we have a little kind of ad hoc committee working to start to get that going. And then that last one, we're going to make a bet on programming, getting people downtown, filling hotel rooms, getting events to the convention center, just drawing people into the downtown and really setting up our downtown to be Silicon Valley's downtown can be a major tax-based driver that will benefit all of us even if you never go down there. It provides the revenue to fund the services that our neighborhoods need. So that's a bit there. I think we're on to questions. I know I just threw a ton at you. Like I said, I'm handing it off to Councilor Davis for the questions, but why don't we get you? Oh, you've got cards. I forgot how you guys do it. It's so civilized. Many of these I just get tomatoes thrown at me.
Well, that may come later.
Okay.
Usually not, though. And I would on your last comment, it was amazing to see the NVIDIA conference downtown and all those hotel rooms and all that spending in the downtown itself.
Yeah. On that point, the preliminary estimate is it generated $8.5 million worth of economic activity captured by San Jose businesses. One conference was 5 days.
So the question starts off on budget strategy, and do you support what's called zero-based budgeting, which is every department goes down to zero, and then the council and the city manager and the departments can prioritize what's really most important? Since incremental budgeting sometimes means spending that is not necessarily a priority continues when it would easily be allocated to something more pressing.
Yeah, testing. Does it sound okay on that? Okay, great. Conceptually, I do. Having run a startup, we definitely approached our budget that way. It was only the most essential things. I would say, given the size and scope and complexity of the city, going through a full zero-based budgeting process every year would actually itself entail a lot of costs, and some of it unnecessarily. We've got departments like the police department or the fire department that know what they're doing. We push them to get getting incrementally better every year, but revisiting whether or not we're going to have police officers and firefighters doesn't make a lot of sense. Completely rethinking how the airport operates or the wastewater system operates would frankly be a lot of wasted time and effort to truly go to zero. So in principle, I agree. What I've tried to push us to do a little differently, which kind of gets at that notion from a different angle, has been to create priority or focus areas, to pick a small number of priorities where we need transformation. Try to get council and community consensus around those areas. That's basically what I just walked through, because there's a lot the city does that is not in my slide deck tonight. And get us to first commit to certain goals, basically, in those areas, and fund those and prioritize them. And if that then means trade-offs like cutting in other places and asking departments to come back and tell us what they're going to cut so we can achieve the goals in that budget, so be it. And that's exactly what's happening this year, especially because we have that shortfall. Our city manager, right after the March budget message passed, and the council said these are our priorities. These are the areas where we need transformation. These are the areas where we have to concentrate our dollars. The city manager went to every department and said, show me a menu of things you can cut. And work strategically to figure out where can we cut things that won't have significant service impacts on core services most of our residents rely on. Road paving and library hours and all the rest. So I get the principle, I do support it to some extent, but I just think doing it for the entire budget each year, truly going down to zero and rebuilding, I think would just may actually require us to double the size of the budget office and spend a lot of unnecessary money there, and may not actually be that productive.
This next question is a paraphrasing of many questions. Residents in the Gardner neighborhood, which is between, let's say, Virginia and 280 east of Bird. And it comes to do with the Google, which during their entitlement process, they provided money to the city as far as a community fund, and they gave it down payment. Nothing's coming until they actually build it, the balance. But there's concern that that down payment was misspent, misallocated, something was done incorrectly. So I think you may want to give an answer to that question. Not just yet. Let's let the mayor have an opportunity to answer that question, please.
I don't know if Councilor Davis wants to help here, but I did start to hear just today some of this concern, so I pulled a little bit of information, but I'm not as close to it as your council member here in the district. First of all, my understanding is that the budget allocation, part of it is literally just the cost of maintaining the staffing to keep the center open. I think that's a significant part of what we're investing in. Do you want to give the overview first?
Yeah. So in the sort of the down payment for the community benefits, which I think was $7 million or something like that, I made sure with Councilmember Perales that we would designate $1 million of those dollars specifically for the Gardner Community Center, because that is the community center in closest proximity to the Google project, and we wanted to make sure that we addressed frankly, the pressure that folks would be feeling from that area, especially in terms of possible displacement. So that's the history of how that $1 million got designated for that community center. And there was a process with I think they called themselves the Downtown Area Neighborhood Group. They've since renamed themselves, but DANE. There was outreach with the community and focus groups that happened. And as a result of that, the Parks Department went through a budgeting process or a proposed budget, and then had a community meeting to make that clear. We've got a bunch of budget cuts. So, for example, one of the things that Gardner Community Center has is a fitness center, which I had a budget document last year to buy new fitness equipment, but the fitness center wasn't going to be able to be opened on more than a part-time basis. I pushed them to get that open this fiscal year unless we had funding for staff. And This is the only community center that is a reuse center, so not a large community center, that will be open with that $1 million of staffing. If that $1 million is not used over the next 2 years for staffing, that community center will not be open.
No, that's gotta be clarified.
Okay. So, Mayor, did you want to continue on that at all, or did that satisfy Councilmember Davis?
Well, it'll be open for senior lunches.
Well,
Okay,
actually,
great. We're not doing Q&A, we're doing with the questions, so we'll go to the next question. Okay.
We just want to be clear.
Yeah, so we're going to go on to the question. So, Mayor, this one is considered a lack of accountability and consequences have led to the. Mayor, did you want to?
Well, what I just suggest, I want to make sure you get answers to your questions. I also don't, and I appreciate that you all came out, and it's an important issue, and I know the council member and I are willing to chat with you. That being said, there are many other people here with many other questions. What I would suggest, if you're okay, what I'd suggest is I am very happy along with my staff, and I don't know if the council member and hers will
We've
be
tried
here
that.
to chat a little bit at the end of the meeting.
We've tried that.
But I do want to make sure we get.
tried that.
Okay, hold on. I want to make sure we get a representative sample of the questions and concerns that the broader community has. I think we can cycle back to follow-up questions, but let's make sure we get a couple other questions on the table because we've only budgeted an hour.
Point of fact, that was a misrepresentation of the facts.
Okay. I'm committed to a follow-up conversation with you all to make sure we're all on the same page about the facts.
Great. This question, lack of accountability and consequences have led to the rise of homeless addicts. Why aren't you urging police to enforce laws and arrest homeless that are under the influence of illegal drugs or drunk in public or have multiple bicycles with them?
Well, point of fact, I have certainly done that many times and will continue to. In fact, we had an issue in a very dense residential neighborhood downtown with repeated drug dealing, drug use, and we did a big press conference with representatives from PD, Sheriff's Office, and VA, saying very clearly we're not going to tolerate drug dealing and open-air drug use in San Jose. If you're dealing, you're going to be arrested and prosecuted, and if you're using, we're going to do everything in our power to get you into treatment. So yeah, we absolutely should. The challenges are as follows. One is on the enforcement front, very thinly staffed department, can't be everywhere at once, and the feedback that PD gave to that neighborhood that helped us really crack down and make a difference in that neighborhood was, you are eyes and ears out there, and please keep calling 911 to report drug dealing when you see it. And those points on a map help us figure out where to deploy very limited resources. So that's one point we can follow up on, is making sure we have the data on where you're consistently seeing it happen. The other point, and look, I don't want to veer too much into politics, because this is my own personal opinion, and it's a state level issue, and it could end up down the road, kind of in the electoral process, but I personally believe we have some real challenges around the adherence to the diversion programs that have become the default in the criminal justice system. What do I mean by this? We have a drug court. In fact, Judge Manley, I had lunch with him a couple times, talked about these issues extensively. He was kind of the founder of the drug court in our county. The idea is, there's a class of crime, let's say drug possession being a great example, where, or let's say you're under the influence and commit a very low-level crime, where it might actually be better for you and society if we could get you to actually enroll in and adhere to a diversion program like drug treatment and job training, in theory. Now, when Prop 47 was passed, it was a very bold move that did a lot of decriminalization and decarceration, and the promise to the community was, locking people up at a cost of $100,000 per person per year doesn't seem to be rehabilitating people. It's costing a heck of a lot, and we're one of the most incarcerated places on earth. Maybe we should try something different. So the idea, the voters supported this statewide pretty overwhelmingly, was let's do some decriminalization of things like drug possession, and then let's invest in these alternatives and divert people and get them into drug treatment, job training. Sounds great. In practice, though, it didn't go so well. One is, the jail population came down, judges sentenced fewer people to jail, but the cost didn't come down. And to be really blunt with you, you can thank the statewide, prison guard union and interest group for ensuring that the level of staffing and the costs went up at a rate to fill that gap. So we're now paying more than ever before, even after a 15-20% reduction in the jail population. So there weren't new funds available to spend on diversion. We also lost an important lever for getting people to adhere to those programs. So if you talk to some of the judges who've been around for a while, they'll tell you that it used to be you'd say, hey, you're in my drug court, you can go enroll in this program, we'll check in every month, and if you don't come back, you're going to face 30 days of jail time. Well, we're not using jail as a lever for actually holding people accountable to adhere to the program. And so we're seeing higher and higher failure rates and just lack of participation in drug courts. In some counties, participation in drug courts down over 50% since the passage of Prop 47. And so you still have the judicial bench, no matter what the police do, or even what the DA does in some cases, you'll have the judges still say, well, we're going to divert you from jail, here's the program I'll refer you to. But the availability of the programs, the quality of the programs, the adherence to the program, and the incentives and accountability for sticking with the program is all lacking. And so that's a massive gap, and it's a huge problem. It's why I think we need some reform, whether the legislature can do it on its own, or we can come back to the voters, we shall see. It may come back to you all in November. But this notion that we're going to invest in alternatives to incarceration and get better outcomes and save money is a great one, but in practice, we haven't done a great job of implementing it. And it's not fair to the residents, to the small business owners. So again, my message is, from a policing standpoint, we're going to continue to arrest you. But all we can do at the city level is arrest you and take you to county jail. What happens from there is up to intake and pretrial services. It's up to the magistrate who is on call at that time. It's up to the DA and what they file, and ultimately it's up to the judge and what they decide. All of that's on the county side. Not to make an excuse, I've been very vocal on this, but I need your help, and you got to understand the lay of the land to talk to your county supervisor, your DA, and pay attention to those races for judge. Because that's kind of the reality on the ground. I talk to our police officers, they arrest people over and over again, all the time. And these people, by the way, they need intervention that works. Often they are dealing with severe behavioral health, addiction and other issues. So anyway, it's a complicated issue. I'm very aware of it. We'll keep arresting people and try to get them, into treatment, into job training, or where appropriate and possible, into jail for a while as a consequence. But so much of that's on the county side of the system there. So I'm happy to have a longer conversation if there's a subgroup here that wants to talk about a specific issue in your neighborhood. But that's kind of the broader lay of the land right now.
This question is, why is it policy of the city to not remove an RV that someone is living in?
Depends on the circumstances. We adjust. So first of all, let me just say, the California Vehicle Code is extremely restrictive, and the state has actually made it very difficult to do that. But we have given ourselves expanded tow authority. Now we have to, literally as we wrote the ordinance this year, this is new, we had to be very clear that the policy was not about lived-in versus non-lived-in vehicles. Per the state vehicle code, you cannot discriminate on the basis of whether or not the vehicle is lived-in. It is a vehicle. So you have to look at how you govern the parking of the vehicle and the public safety risk it may pose. To tow RVs from in front of, say, a school, which is something that we've contemplated now doing around some of our schools, we have to do an engineering assessment and have a formal process by which someone in our Department of Transportation, an engineer, comes back and says, I have assessed this, and there's a public safety risk to leaving these oversized vehicles in this location. So it's just the California Vehicle Code is extremely restrictive. We are expanding our ability for towing after an engineering assessment. We can post signs in tow, but the only way that neighboring cities like Mountain View and Redwood City have made real progress in moving RVs off local roads is to designate specific areas where they will not tow. Mountain View had to designate about 1.5 miles of city streets where they said, we're not going to tow in this industrial area. Now, what we're trying to do is something slightly, I hope, better in the long run, which is get, underutilized parking lots and get low-cost leases off-street so that we don't have to, frankly, further impact our very small amount of employment land that contributes most of the tax base by pushing all the RVs into industrial areas. I want to get people into safe parking sites off city streets with some basic services. So that's what we're trying to do more of, is designate areas where people can go. But we can't just tow all the vehicles that are lived in, and frankly, if we could, you'd impound a bunch of vehicles and then have people moving into town on the street. So we'd only be so much better off, if at all, and create more human suffering, frankly. So it's not, unless we create places for people to go, there aren't a lot of great solutions here.
Thank you. And this person is saying that San Diego and Texas cities have moved their homeless out of the city, so why wouldn't the city consider using vacant land such as the Alviso water treatment plant, Coyote Valley, and other areas for these hundreds, thousands of people?
So, would love to go down to San Diego with whoever asked the question. You'll find plenty of tent encampments in the downtown and around the city. But what they are doing is something that we have in this budget for the first time, which is finding underutilized land, particularly public lands, and getting really pragmatic. Not waiting to build a brand new apartment building, not even waiting to do the individual modular units, but lining up rows of brand new tents on pallets, with some basic services, with some porta potties, with a dumpster, with a shower service once a week that's mobile, and just get people into managed sites and off of your streets and into a place with some basic rules and some basic sanitation. And that's what San Diego's been doing, it's what Sacramento's starting to experiment with, Chico's doing it, Reno has done it, and frankly, with the scale of the problem, we can't wait to build a brand new apartment for everybody who's out there. Can't even wait to buy a modular unit and find a place for it and hook it up to the sewer system. We're going to have to get really pragmatic, really quickly, break down that cost and go for scalability. Are we looking at land in Coyote Valley? Yes, we are. Are we looking at land up with the regional wastewater treatment? So yes, we are. Would we be very open to the county allowing us to use a few acres of the county fairgrounds? Absolutely. You all can talk to your county supervisor about that. So we're looking at everything. We're looking at dozens and dozens of potential sites. I don't think we can put it all in one place. You're talking about 4,500 people, high need population, a lot of diversity within that population, a lot of folks who need different things. What they all need, though, is a managed, safe place to be with some basic services, and to the extent possible, everybody who's willing and able, we got to get into greater self-sufficiency, because we just can't solve this the way we've been trying to. It's been too slow and too expensive.
And staying on the theme here, if the individual in the encampment does not want to go to the shelter or to where the bed's offered, what happens then? I think there's a lot of discussion with, is there enforcement, is there no enforcement?
Yeah, this question was up a lot around kind of incentives and accountability. And I mean, my basic view, this is a huge oversimplification, is we in Dover on behalf of the community, and I'd rather this be kind of a statewide strategy than city by city, frankly, but we have a basic responsibility, in my view at least, to create basic dignified shelter, sanitation, security for those living outside. I think there is an obligation to do that. When it's available, I think the other side of that coin, though, is that we should require that people take advantage of it. People come indoors. Now, people always say, what do you mean by require? Well, we're not going to, basically, we only have a few levels. The primary one is what we call an abatement. We can go to an encampment and we can increase the frequency. We can go more often and say, look, we're offering you dignified shelter over here. We're not going to let you camp here. Okay, so you can abate encampments, tell people to move along until they feel incentivized to say, I'm tired of getting moved along. This is no fun. It's very, stressful and inconvenient to continually get moved. And if we can offer people shelter, I feel okay with abating and telling people you have an option. The problem has been, we don't even have that opportunity because we have a waiting list. We stopped taking names after 350 people who said they wanted a tiny modular unit. We took names, we got a big list and said, this is crazy, like we're going to set false expectations. So until we get to the point where we have enough safe, dignified places for people to go, to even call somebody's bluff, it's hard to talk about accountability. Because we got people putting their hand up saying, give me something, give me anything. So I want to get to a point where we have enough shelter, enough basic safe managed places, enough basic services to offer folks that we can actually say, you got to come in to a safe managed site where you got to find another city that's okay with unmanaged camping wherever you want, because we're not okay with that. But frankly, we're not at the point where we can say no to it. It's not a crime to be homeless. We got to offer people somewhere to go. And by the way, for that, I have had a few people retort and say, well, just enforce the law, lock them up, and blah. Okay, I understand the anger and the frustration, totally fine. I'll just remind folks though, it costs us, $135,000 per person per year to keep someone in the criminal justice system, and it doesn't make them any better off. It'd be a lot cheaper to find other places for people to go than the jail. Okay.
Okay, a creek trail path runs through Los Gatos, Campbell, and San Jose, but they do not have a homeless issue in those cities like San Jose. What are those two cities doing differently?
Yeah, well, this is why I say we need really statewide strategies, countywide strategies, and we really need to push folks, our representatives at higher levels of government, to be bolder and more comprehensive, because it is not feasible or fair for a half dozen big cities to try to solve this problem for the whole state. And it does often feel that way. So we need to push. Now, we're not the only cities with homelessness, but we do have a disproportionate share. And, you know, what are those cities doing? I think to some extent, they are pushing homeless people out of their city limits. They're pushing them toward San Jose, effectively. So, one of the things that the county is doing with Measure A, and I would like to see a lot more of, is distributing the deeply affordable housing. So I think I had, concern, frankly, that they just put it all in downtown San Jose, and all put it all in one area. And I think, distributing the solutions and distributing the tax burden is really important. What we need to do, frankly, in my view, you all can help as advocates. You're the constituents, just as I am, of our county supervisors and our state legislators in particular, is we need a more comprehensive strategy for providing shelter, treatment beds, affordable housing, statewide for folks who need it. There's a lot of wealth and a lot of land across the state, and to try to do it all city by city. Now, the problem is, it is not an acceptable answer for me to tell you we're going to wait for the state to figure it out. You guys, wanted action, yesterday, right? And want impact today, and we got to do the best we can with the dollars we have. I'm not convinced that a half dozen big cities can truly solve this problem on our own. So we're going to need to push, and I'm going to look more in the years ahead to what can we do? Statewide ballot measures, regional measures, to try to pool resources across all the cities and distribute the shelter, the treatment beds, the affordable housing more evenly. That, I think, is the answer in the long run. But, to the extent that it's kind of a get tough or it's going to enforce the rules, San Jose is so big that when you abate people from one place, they just move to another San Jose neighborhood. It doesn't. We spend millions of dollars just chasing people around the city, telling them you can't camp here, you can't camp here. It's not a good use of your resources, frankly.
Continuing on, I watched a video about San Diego Tent City, it has created secondary encampments next door. How will you control such secondary encampments?
Yeah, great question. So I talked about preserving our progress. One of the things we put in the March message as just a basic starter here is this notion. I really believe that the neighborhoods that take on the solutions to homelessness should see the benefits. Should be made better, not worse. Often should have a guarantee of that. One of the things we put in the March message was, just as a starting point, any interim site, any safe parking site, safe sleeping site should, no questions asked, have a 2-block walking radius in any direction that are just permanent, full-time ban on the campus. You just cannot be camped out there or in a limited vehicle there. We just create a buffer zone. I'd love for those to be larger. We actually have quite a few sites with interim and supportive housing and safe parking and safe sleeping. We need to start somewhere and see how it goes. If it's pretty straightforward and cost-effective to implement, we might be able to make those larger. We might get to a point where neighborhoods are saying, hey, you know what? I feel a little differently about having some affordable housing or a treatment center or a shelter because my neighborhood then won't have any camps. Might change the incentives, but we're going to have to, everybody's going to have to give something if we're going to solve this problem. So it's about, creating solutions and then ensuring the neighborhoods that take on the burden are better off, not worse off. Frankly, I think that means banning encampments within the vicinity of that site. So that's what we're gonna do.
Okay. I'm wondering why the margin for the speed cameras is 12 miles per hour. Could you speak on that?
To be honest, I don't know. It may have been the state enabling legislation. What I do know is, so we're allowed to have up to 33 of these cameras. They can automatically issue tickets for speeding. The enabling legislation was very prescriptive about how they will operate, how many we can have, where they will be. They're allowed to be placed here at schools and in our Vision Zero corridors, effectively, our most dangerous corridors with the most crashes, injuries, and fatalities. We just received an $8.7 million federal grant to mostly pay for those, so most of that will not be on all of us here locally, and it will be, but it's a federal grant, so they're putting most of the bill. They probably will be deployed and operational early next year, but for the first 6 months, they will just mail you a warning, and then after those 6 months, you'll just get a ticket in the mail if you are 12 miles or more over the speed limit near a school or in a Vision Zero corridor where they've been deployed. Only 33 cameras, so not a lot of spots.
Okay, animal shelters are at capacity. There's not enough space. What is the plan to expand physical capacity long term? Do we need a bigger shelter or additional buildings or kennels? Buildings for kennels.
Yes, we need to do a lot of things at once here. The city manager has been supportive of the push I and some other council members have made to try to get more staffing and dollars there over the last few years, because we know we've underinvested relative to the need. One is on space. City manager of public works are looking at how to flex space on site there, maybe using some of the back parking lot or another facility. So I don't yet have the answer to that, but they're looking at where do we have underutilized city space where we could kind of expand out because it's way too crowded at the animal care center. So that is one strategy I know she's looking at. If she has a site in mind, I'm not aware of it yet, but we can follow up, and maybe we can take a note to follow up with the city manager and Matt Mahan Public Works and circle back with if anybody wants to. By the way, for any specific follow-ups, if you just email me at mayor@sanjoseca.gov, we'll follow up on your very specific questions. But yes, flexing space is one. Rebuilding our volunteer corps that fell off during the pandemic, and then really supporting those volunteers, those external groups that are doing so much of the heavy lifting around tracking and spaying and neutering the stray animals, particularly stray cats, is really important. They're doing incredible work that is uncompensated. They're doing it out of the goodness of their hearts because they have a passion for helping the animals. And we've got a lot of stray cats out there in particular. We need to track them and spay and neuter them very quickly. And so supporting them and helping them expand what they do is kind of the strategy. Trying to just incrementally get more dollars in the budget to enable that work is really what we're trying to do right now.
This one's very specific. So what's the status on fixing Blackford Lane and surrounding streets? This is in a northeastern portion of Glen Hamilton and Meridian. You probably don't know that one offhand, but do you want to speak to how the tax increase has been paving the roads and how that's been going, and will that be enough to pave them all?
Yeah, so good question. And if Councilor Davis knows about the
Blackford Lane.
Otherwise I will educate myself after the meeting, and if you email me at mayor@sanjoseca.gov, we'll get you an answer, or your council member will. So thanks to your support, a combination of Measure T and the increased gas tax has the revenue to the city that is enabling us to start to catch up on our deferred maintenance backlog. You will remember after the Great Recession, we went, almost a decade not maintaining local roads. And it's penny wise, pound foolish. We didn't have the money to do it, but what it did was shift hundreds of dollars a year in unnecessary costs on all of you and wear and tear on your vehicles. So thanks to your support for those revenues, we are now paying. We're paying about 25 miles per district per year, or 250 miles citywide each year. But the backlog is almost a 10-year backlog. The Measure T dollars run out in 2028, so we're going to have to decide What we want to do, we will still have those higher gas tax revenues, so we will be able to continue to do maintenance. The goal is by 2028 to get caught up on all the repaving. I will tell you, it's not far from perfect, but we have this measure, PCI index, from 0 to 100 for a road. We went from 63 to 73 over the last 5 years or so, because we've been paving over 200 miles of road each year. So we were getting back, and that's pretty good. That's actually where most big cities are, or better than a lot of big cities. So we're going to keep plugging away, but 2028, most of that revenue goes away. We measure T is fully deployed, and we'll have to decide if the community will do some polling. We'll talk to you. Is it a move to extend that and continue that level of maintenance? We have a big maintenance backlog on parks, on a lot of city facilities, so it would be nice to extend Measure T in some form if the community supports it. Councilor?
Yeah, just wanted to mention that there's a pavement story map. You can just Google San Jose pavement story map, and it will tell you, give you all the maps. You can find out exactly when your street is going to be paved. So I can't look at individual streets on the map on my phone, but on a bigger screen, you can see exactly and find out when Blackbird is going to be paved.
What's it called again?
San Jose pavement story map.
Story?
Yeah, story like a storybook. Yeah, so that will give you everything that's going to be, and the whole plan is set now out through 2028.
This one is, did anyone in the audience find a cell phone left outside on a bench? I'm assuming that's a smartphone. And if you found it, if you could bring it up, that person's going through some stress right now. And then I understand the mayor has to go, and I'm just going to paraphrase, which is about multiple cards, which is regarding unforeseen development. So in Willow Glen, on a 2-lane road next to single-family homes, is proposed a 7-story building. It was never contemplated in the city's general plan. What is the city doing to fight these proposals, which seem to be extraordinary, and the community is very concerned? So I think you've heard this type of question before.
I have, and I believe, but you may know that that's one that came in under building remedy. Is that?
That's correct.
Yeah. So our planning department and city attorney are going through. We need to process those applications, but we are very concerned about basically all of them. Particularly concerned about ones like that are so out of whack with the neighborhood. And there's a set of them, going back to that first issue I raised in our tax base, that convert employment land, industrial land that generates tax revenue into low density housing that is a net loss actually for the city financially. So we have to process them, but there is, what I can say, and there may be kind of a legal battle over some of these, is that we will go through the process. We will look at CEQA. We will look at their appropriateness and what, if anything, the city may be able to do to get them to right size or to prevent conversions that would harm our tax base. So we're going to see what the process allows, but that is state law, kind of like some of the others that have been passed in recent years that have really taken a lot of local control away from cities. We generally been a pretty good actor on housing, but there are many cities in the state that have said no to housing and contributed to this housing crisis. And the state's response was to treat us all the same and take away local control with these blanket policies, rather than creating incentives that were more flexible and nuanced and kind of treated us more individually as a city. So it's a little disappointing, but we have far fewer levers than we once did to control land use, actually.
Great. Well, thank you, Mayor Mahan, Councilmember Davis. Thank you to the community for coming out.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks,
If you have any interest in volunteering for our National Night Out event, which will be held the first Tuesday in August, feel free to stick around and we'll be happy to chat. Thank you everyone for coming, and once again, thanks St. Francis Episcopal Church.